evening. Thanks for coming out. My name's Stina. I'm with Quick Soup. Tonight you actually have a double feature you probably already know. We have Marisa, Tellez, and Carla, Harvey. Marisa is a native Angelino, and she's the author of 2 books, Rock and Roll High School and Walking Contradiction. She's going to read first before I give her the floor, and then she's going to introduce Carla. If I can remind you guys to silence your devices during the reading, that would be great. And also, if you don't have the books yet, they're available for purchase at the register before signing. So without further ado, thanks again. Here is Marisa Tellez.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thanks so much for coming. I'm Marisa Tellez, and my new workbook is Walking Contradiction, The Crack Rock Chronicles, which is actually the sequel to Rock and Roll High School, my first book. For those that don't know, as she said, I am originally from Los Angeles, and I grew up hanging out right here on the Sunset Strip during the glam rock scene of the late 80s and early 90s. And I kept daily journals of everything that happened back then. What people wore, what they said, what they did, who they did too. And I took those journals and, along with some interviews with musicians and friends, and I created Rock and Roll High School. So with Walking Contradiction, I feel that that title, like Walking Contradiction, The Crack Rock Chronicles, I just feel that that title represents me perfectly in my 20s and some of my early 30s, because I really didn't know what the hell I was doing at the time. Grunge had come in and completely wiped out the music scene in Los Angeles. I had friends that were dying from drug overdoses, excuse me, and some even suicide, all barely into their 20s, and excuse me. And I just felt a bit lost, both personally and professionally at that time. So with Walking Contradiction, I literally walk you through that process of how everything finally came together, through the craziness and the roller coaster of crazy relationships and the insanity of working in the television industry, to finally meeting a great guy and having that healthy relationship and finally getting the career in entertainment that I wanted. And of course, having my dream come true of writing these books and finally getting them published and be able to share them with you guys tonight. So the book also updates you, obviously everybody that you read about in Rock and Roll High School as well, and shows you how much the music scene has changed in Los Angeles over the last 25 years. So the clip that I'm going to read you tonight is actually a mashup of both books, and it starts with the first time that I drove to Hollywood. I was 16 and I had just gotten my driver's license, and it was a few days after I got my driver's license, and even though I'd been going to shows out here since I was about 13 or 14, this was the first time that I really got a chance to hang out on the boulevard and experience what all the craziness was about. So this is me at Sweet 16 driving to Hollywood for the first time, and I hope you enjoy it. After picking up Sasha, we made our way to Arcadia for a friend's party. But when I turned down the street to our friend's house, I noticed 3 cop cars parked out front and people leaving the house. I was pissed. I had a brand new driver's license and it was a Friday night. There's no way in hell I was going home. Why don't we go to the Strip, Sasha asked. Yeah, right, I said. Why not? You're a licensed driver, aren't you? Sasha was right. There was no reason why we couldn't go. But I hadn't driven that far away from home, though. Not by myself, anyway. But technically, I wouldn't be alone because Sasha would be with me. Of course, it's not normal rationale, but in our 16-year-old minds, it made perfect sense. So we hopped on the 101 freeway and made our way out to Hollywood. As we turned the corner of Sunset Boulevard and approached the Whiskey A Go-Go, it looked like a building evacuation had taken place. A blanket of people covered the entire sidewalk, so much so that people were spilling into the streets. It was like a freak show. Spiked hair, colored hair, no hair, leather and spandex clothing, or very little clothing. And this circus continued as we drove up Sunset past a club called Gazzari's. After finally parking down the street, we huffed and puffed our way up Doheny and finally reached Sunset Boulevard. We walked past Gazzari's and our empty hands were instant magnets as various musicians bombarded us with their show flyers from every direction. It was a scene I was somewhat familiar with from going to shows at Gazzari's, the Roxy, and the Whiskey, but I'd never gotten a chance to really hang out on the Strip before. I was usually bolting through the crowd in a mad rush to make my curfew. I listened in on a few random conversations as we walked down Sunset Boulevard. The street was like a sick and twisted networking session. Musicians shook hands and kissed babies, schmoozing underage and overage girls into going to see their band play in the hopes of moving up the show ladder to the coveted headlining slot. As Sasha and I approached the Roxy, I noticed a man in a trench coat. He was walking in the street, playfully fisting a blow-up doll with one hand and carrying a stack of flyers in the other. I don't even want to know what band he's trying to promote, I said to Sasha. He targeted us immediately, or should I say Sasha's boobs that were practically spilling out of her top. He tucked the blow-up doll under his arm and made a beeline right for us. I quickly grabbed Sasha and dragged her away. We furthered our way down the strip and had just passed a local pizza place when I heard someone yell, "Wow, what a great ass." I felt a hard pinch on my butt and turned around to find a guy's face near my rump. He had spiked out black hair, just past his ears and small beady blue eyes. He stuffed a flyer in my hand for a band called Frady Cats and tore off down Sunset Boulevard. Did he seriously just bite my ass right now? I asked Sasha. I'll say he did, she said with a giggle. My head was spinning from all these crazy characters, and we still hadn't completed one lap down Sunset Boulevard yet. Needing a breather, we decided to walk over and sit down. We chatted a little bit, but I was more preoccupied with people watching. A musician would walk up to some girls, give them a flyer, talk about his show, and walk off. The girls would either keep the flyer or toss it right to the ground as soon as the guy would walk away. Some would even throw it to the ground right in front of them. It was the same cycle over and over again. Sasha and I made a few more laps up and down the strip, chatting with random people. About 3 hours later, we left with our hands full of flyers and the latest issue of Rock City News in our hands. On the way home, we talked of all the crazy people we encountered and how much fun we had, so we went back the following night. Sasha and I had been on the strip for about an hour when we took a seat on an AstroTurf staircase near the pizza place. I was organizing my flyers while Sasha was talking to a few people, and that's when a blonde rocker walked up and glared at me. He was extremely thin, with blue eyes and long, stringy hair. I'd seen him on the strip the night before, but I wasn't sure if he was in a band. He wasn't passing out flyers like every other guy on the strip. He just always seemed to be lingering around the boulevard, especially near the Rainbow. He continued to stare at me for a few moments, then approached me and asked if I wanted to go with him to his car to do blow. "No thanks," I said casually as I continued arranging my things. "You sure, honey?" "I'm sure. I've never done it before anyway." "Well, in that case, I'd be honored to pop your coat cherry." I started to get irritated and said, "No, I'll pass." "Sweetheart, you don't know what you're missing. How about I give you a quick bump right now to give you a little taste?" "Am I starring in a bad after-school special right now? Fuck off!" He shot me a dirty look, said, "Suit yourself, Prudence," and walked off. What an asshole. I wasn't about to do blow on Sunset Boulevard just for some loser to think I was cool. I couldn't give two shits what he or anyone else in Hollywood thought of me. If people couldn't accept me for being a tomboy with a dislike for cocaine, then that was perfectly fine with me. After getting my things organized, Sasha and I picked ourselves up off the stairs and made our way towards Gazzari's. About an hour later, we were chatting with a few people in front of the Roxy when I noticed Axl Rose walking through the parking lot of the Rainbow. He was wearing a black and red flannel shirt with a simple pair of jeans. During that time, Guns N' Roses were in their prime, and rumor had it they were working on a double album, which later became the Use Your Illusion albums. I continued to watch Axl as he made his way through the crowded parking lot, sipping on a can of cherry Coke. I wondered if it was really him because he was walking alone and nobody seemed to recognize him as he walked by them. By the time he reached the sidewalk, Sasha and I turned on our heels and decided to follow him. We started to lose him as he darted across Sunset Boulevard, so I yelled out his name in the hopes of slowing him down. He came to a stop in front of Ted Masa Sushi. "Hi, Axl, I'm Marisa. Can I take a picture with you?" I said, slightly out of breath. "Yeah, sure," he said unenthusiastically. I grabbed a random person that happened to be standing nearby and asked if they could take the picture. I hoped for a hug or maybe even an arm over the shoulder from Axl, but I got nothing. He didn't even move an inch. He just stood there sipping on his soda while Sasha and I posed around him as if he were a mannequin. I wanted to ask him a few things about Guns N' Roses, but based on the cold reception he was giving me, I felt like he might punch me in the face. I figured it was best if I just get the picture and let him be on his way. "Thanks so much," I said, smiling, hoping that my happy face would warm him up a little. "Sure," he said in a monotone voice and walked away. And this was my life every Friday and Saturday night for the next few years. Hanging out on the Sunset Strip, going to shows, parties, and being witness to things my pubescent eyes were way too young to see. But as the old saying goes, nothing lasts forever. Cops began to put a stronghold on our socializing and started patrolling the boulevard on foot. If you stopped to talk to someone, it wouldn't be long before an officer popped up behind you, asking you to keep it moving. And bands couldn't pass out flyers anymore because the residents were bitching about the amount of litter and loitering in their neighborhood. It was around the same time that I went through a particularly bad breakup and secluded myself to my home. After licking my wounds for a few months and wanting to break my current state of hibernation, I dragged my stitched-up heart to see some friends play a show at the Roxy. Although I saw many familiar faces, I still felt a bit out of place. I figured it was a mild case of cabin fever since I hadn't been out in so long, but the reality hit about a half hour later when I walked outside to get some air. I glanced down the empty sidewalks of Sunset Boulevard and realized it was the end of an era. Grunge music had successfully invaded Los Angeles. As a result, a majority of the Sunset Strip's glam rock bands threw their spandex pants into their pink glitter caboodles and moved back to their hometowns. And any that remained had done a complete image overhaul. The days of every guy wanting to have long hair were gone because having long hair wasn't cool anymore. Many of the guys had chopped off their locks and were now sporting stylish short doos or radical mohawks. The glitzy candy-ass band names were changed to something angry and edgy. The music wasn't fun and lighthearted anymore. It was harder, grittier. And makeup, oh god no. If you were a guy wearing makeup, you were made fun of and looked upon like some kind of sad old relic. Even Gazzari's, one of the Sunset Strip's landmark clubs, officially closed just a few months earlier. There were hopes that someone would come along and revive the club. But despite having a generous music history with landmark bands like The Doors and Van Halen gracing its stage, it was more recently known as a hair band club. And no one was willing to invest money in an audience that didn't exist anymore. In a nutshell, grunge music had come in like a tsunami. It annihilated every glam band off the face of the planet and wiped its ass with whoever was left. The entire span of my teenage years was spent hanging out on the Sunset Strip during its glam rock era, and now it was officially over. I stood there as a 20-year-old woman looking around at the skeleton of what was once the biggest ongoing street party in the country. I grew up in Hollywood during the decade of decadence. It was a time of absolute insanity, gluttony, and shamelessness. How the hell was I going to function in a standard social setting? And what do normal people do for fun anyway? That's it. Before I go, I just want to say thanks to Booksoup for having us tonight, and also a special thank you to Carla. I read a quote not too long ago that said something to the effect of, girls compete with each other, but women support and encourage one another. And I feel that that's what tonight is really all about. So I want to say thank you to Carla for being such a good friend and for inviting me to be a part of this with you, not only to promote my books, but I'm also here to support you because releasing your first book is such a huge accomplishment and it deserves to be celebrated. So get your ass up here and tell us about Death and Other Dances.
Marisa was a huge help to me during this whole process. This is my first book, and I was nervous about writing it, nervous about releasing it. I didn't know anything about the publishing world, and so I called her like every other day, like, well, what do I do now? Are they gonna like it? Are they gonna like? Should I just stop the whole process right now? And she was very helpful, so I am forever grateful to her. So thank you, and thank you guys for being here tonight with me and Marisa. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carla Harvey, and I'm the author of Death and Other Dances. Like I said, it's my first book. I grew up a chubby, introverted Midwestern kid. My only friends were books and heavy metal. So I'd literally stay in my room all day listening to metal and reading and writing. And I always knew that I wanted to write my own book one day. I was a huge fan of authors like Bukowski and Henry Rollins, and I loved that really gritty, visceral writing that came straight from the author's own experience. And that's what I dreamed about doing one day. But I thought, what the hell am I ever going to do with my life that's going to be that important that I'll be able to write a book about it one day? Well, finally, a few years ago, I started volunteering for hospice, and I found that thing. And that was a correlation that I found between my two careers at the time, which was stripping. In case you guys don't know, yes, I was a stripper. I'm not ashamed of it. I celebrate it. And also my work in the mortuary and hospice. And that correlation that I found was human touch and how it connects us all and how badly we all need to be touched and loved. And we live in a time where loneliness is kind of an epidemic, and we don't reach out and touch each other anymore. We're more connected in a lot of ways than we were 20 years ago, but more disconnected in other ways. And a lot of us in this room, if you're like me, you're from a generation of people who come from broken homes, and you're very detached and just have a lot of problems and with relationships and connecting with other human beings on any level, whether it be friendship or a relationship level. I struggled with those things my whole life. So that became what I wanted to write about. And I originally intended to write this book about other people and not really myself. But as I started writing, as most authors I think do, this book was really about me and about things that I had struggled with my whole life. And became a very cathartic experience for me writing the book, and I feel like I'm a better person for writing it. And as I was writing it, I kept thinking to myself, even if I don't publish this book, even if not a single person reads it, I have become a better person by doing this and getting all my thoughts and feelings about who I am and what I've done with my past on paper. And there are some things that I didn't even intend to write about at all that really became central themes of the whole book. And one of those things was a habit that I've had since I was a child. I was really fascinated with death from the time I was a very, very young child. And I took that fascination to another level by killing off people in my head that I became attached to, because I didn't want to be hurt. And so I figured if I killed them off mentally, and I would go through all the motions, I would kill them, plan their funeral, mourn them, then they couldn't hurt me if they did eventually leave me. So the very first person I killed was my father, and I thought that'd be a good place for me to start reading. Divorces are shattering. Your whole life changes overnight. You're carted off to your grandparents' house. Your mother stops smiling and ages 10 years before your eyes. Your father doesn't come around. When he does, it's court ordered and he takes you to miniature golf or loads you up with sweets and toys in an attempt to make you forget that he's even been gone at all. Then he delivers you back to your mother, who is waiting with arms crossed in the front yard and who simply can't compete with the new herself, the elf playset. Our father still lived in the house we grew up in. We did not go back to that house for what seemed like a very long time, and then one day we were dropped off for an afternoon with him. We sat in my mother's escort in the driveway of our old house for a while, pleading with her not to make us go in. It seemed odd to me that the house even still existed at all, as if my brother, mother, and I leaving should have made it crumble to the ground. My mother finally shooed us out of the car towards our father, who stood in the doorway waiting for us. Our hellos with him were brief. I eyed the house behind him. There was no laughter echoing through it, no games of Mad Dog to be played, no frogs being pulled apart in the living room. The foyer that had swallowed me whole and broken my ankle now looked timid. The sunshine still made thick, dusty rays through the living room, and I took comfort in that as I kneeled in front of the big bay windows that looked out into our backyard. Sandbox, grapevine, somehow it was all still there. Ice cream, my father asked. He was at a loss for what to do with the court-mandated 8 hours his 2 children were left in his care. I beamed. Food. Well, food would equal happy feelings. We hopped into my father's van and rode down Telegraph Road to Farrell's, our favorite ice cream joint. Human League played on the stereo as my dad blew smoke rings out of the window. My brother and I sang along in the back of the Ford Astro van while performing robotic dance moves. Every mile or so, my dad would pull over, hop out, and run behind the van for a crushed can he'd see in the road. "Daddy can do," he'd announce, holding the retrieved can over his head like a trophy after he got back into the van. Michigan's recycling program can make an opportunist a rich man. We pulled into Farrell's, pushed our way through the doors, and claimed the big booth. I ordered a butterscotch sundae. I had ice cream, I had my brother, and I had my daddy. I was feeling a lot better. Then she walked over to us. She wore a beret and her big breasts and thighs jiggled underneath her clothing. My father stood up to greet her. "This is Angie," he said, putting his arm around her as she stared at us with glassy eyes. He squeezed her ass and she giggled. I was suddenly very aware of my stomach hanging over my tie-dyed stretch pants, the butterscotch that had coagulated on the corner of my lip, and my frizzy hair. "Hi," Angie squeaked, popping her gum and shifting her weight from hip to hip. She draped herself across my father as her eyes darted back and forth between my brother and I. I looked out Farrell's window at the gray skies and heavy traffic on Telegraph Road. My Sunday was no longer appealing. The ride back home in the Astro van was quiet and reserved. Back at our old house, I went directly to my bedroom and slammed the door shut. Most of my favorite things were still in that yellow room. I decided they needed to come back with me to my grandparents' house immediately. I didn't want this Angie to come by and poke around at my things. I started to pack them up in my backpack, my dolls, the plush dog I named Dodo Bird and rubbed myself on every night to help me fall asleep, my collection of Scandinavian fairy tales. Everything was going into the bag. My father walked in and watched silently as I gathered my belongings. "You don't have to take this stuff right now," he whispered. He studied me for a moment more, then yanked the backpack out of my hand and threw it to the floor, scattering Barbie dolls across the carpet. I said, "You don't have to take all this shit with you right now." His words trailed off into a muffled whisper. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. I wanted him to go away. Where had he been? We'd been waiting weeks for him to see us. Had he been with her? Had my brother, mother, and I been replaced that easily? He sat on the bed next to me, and his body began to shake. I stiffened. He was crying. I had never seen my father cry, not even when his father had died. I wanted to reach for him, to curl my tawny body around his. Instead, I remained straight-armed and silent. His face fell to his hands in great heaving sobs, and as he cried, it came to me. The idea happened in an instant, but it was an instant of intense clarity that my young mind was overtaken by. I knew just what I had to do to fix the situation. Heart attack, I decided. I had read about this heart attack thing in the big blue medical book on my grandmother's shelf. I closed my eyes. My father was working in the yard, right by our grapevine. I waved to him. He started to wave back at me, then stopped and clutched at his chest. I watched him fall to the ground, the shovel in his hand hitting the earth with a thud. I ran to him, of course, but it was too late. He was gone, just like my granddaddy. At the funeral, I leaned over his casket and kissed him on the cheek. I put purple flowers on his grave, the kind we used to pick together when I was a kid. I'd miss him, but it was better to say goodbye now, better just to end it now. And just like that, he was dead to me. So that was the first thing I'm gonna do. I know a lot of you, as I said, I've been a stripper, or I was a stripper. I haven't been a stripper in a couple of years now because I've been a little bit too busy with a band called Butcher Babies. But I've been a stripper, half my life, and most of you have perceptions about what strippers are, who they are, what kind of people they are. Most people think they're terrible people who can't do anything but dance, and who probably have horrible drug habits and daddy issues. And yes, I had all of those things going on for me. But at the same time, strippers are some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. They're funny, they're smart, and there's so many different stories. So don't judge books by their covers all the time. I think there's a time period that you can get out of it gracefully. And I think that as long as you keep your head on straight and make the money and don't start doing drugs and some of the bad things that we do, you'll be okay. I think that the more interesting thing about strip clubs is the men that go to strip clubs, and they are just as wacky or wackier as the wackiest strippers you could ever think of. So, and also about the whole daddy issue thing, I actually decided that I wanted to be a stripper when I was 7 years old. And this is a true story. I really did, and so I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to segue into a later chapter when I talk about some of the men that I've met. I was 7 years old when I first decided that I wanted to be a stripper. Pre-separation, my parents had left us with our Auntie Denise for a week while they vacationed in Las Vegas. When they came back, they brought with them a Barbie doll-sized showgirl for me, mounted on a platform. She was dressed in a black sequin unitard with black feathers artfully positioned in her perfectly coiffed blonde hair. Her lips were pouty, her eyelids painted electric blue. I fell in love with her immediately. Many hours were spent studying the doll, her shiny plastic limbs, lumps of breast, flawless face stuck in a coquettish expression. She represented everything that I wanted to be and was not, a beauty queen as well as a tiny temptress on a pedestal. I was just a chubby, buck-toothed kid that got in the way of my parents' arguments. In my room, I became my own tiny showgirl with the spotlight on me. I danced just the way that I thought she would, thrusting my hips this way and that. I daydreamed that my parents would look in on me, see me dancing, and remember how wonderful I was. They would tell their friends. Maybe they would even take me to Vegas the next time too, and I'd dance in one of those fancy shows. They never looked in on me. Not long after I got my doll, the phenomenon of hair metal was just getting underway. In a few years, I'd hear Motley Crue's Girls, Girls, Girls on the radio and see the video and be enticed to perform a two-step in the privacy of my yellow preteen bedroom. Yes, this is what men wanted, fast women in heels and lots of makeup. They loved them so much they stuck them on pedestals and sold them in souvenir shops in Las Vegas. And finally, I was old enough to become a public object of desire. Strippers, well, they were the same everywhere, an army of wise women with frosted makeup and fake hair who had mastered a quicker route to a man's wallet than dating or marriage. Even the youngest ones quickly became machines, their eyes blank as they petitioned the Century Lounge goers for dances. The men that sipped juice at the nude bars in Los Angeles, however, were light years away from the red-blooded factory workers whose laps I'd graced back home. Those men had been fairly vanilla in their taste, just looking for an escape from their Midwestern wives, but this crowd had quirks and fetishes. The sniffer would come in and see me a couple of times a week. We'd make our way to a booth, and I'd sit on his lap and hold up my arm while he breathed in the scent from my armpits for a whole 2 songs. One of my other clients owned a popular hilltop restaurant, and when he wasn't catering to high society, he liked me to place a 6-inch heel of my stripper shoe on his cock and press down hard. The louder he moaned, the more pressure I'd apply. I imagined his cock snapping in half under my acrylic heel. Yet another customer liked to put a dog collar on and bark when I danced with him. The exit from a booth after he'd been howling and yapping like a beagle for half an hour was embarrassing, but the $50 a song made it all worth it. Some of the customers' whims I couldn't bring myself to fulfill. At the beginning of one of my shifts, a man flagged me down for a dance. We made our way back to a booth. I stripped off my costume and began to play with my tits. "Can you put your ass in my face?" he asked. I took off my heels and stood on the leather armrest of the couch, shaking my butt against his nose. He groaned with pleasure. "I'll pay you extra if you go take a shit and don't wipe," he said, licking his lips. "What?" I turned around to face him, wrinkling my nose. "You know, I want to smell your shit." Please? I'll tip you really well. I'll pass, I said. As different as my customers' tastes were, they all had a common bond. They were looking for something they'd lost long ago. They were looking for someone to make them feel like men again, if only in 3-minute-long increments set to Foghat's slow ride. When the wives pushed them away or started treating them like less than ordinary men, they came to me to fill the void. I asked them how their day was when their wife forgot to ask or had stopped caring. I laughed at their jokes, played with their hair, feigned fascination at their mundane traits, cooed over their computer job, and was handsomely rewarded for it. Besides cold hard cash, I had amassed a Rolodex full of services men could render for me if need be. A mechanic, a guy to fix the locks, a guy to get the dent out of my car where I'd rubbed it against a pole high in coke, a tile guy, a fisherman that brought me fresh mahi-mahi steaks, a pet store owner that gave me a vapid dog, the DMV guy that let me cut in line. In the time I'd been a dancer, I had learned the power of a smile to someone who was nagged at home or stuck in a shit job, the power of a simple touch on a stranger's hand or cheek. If I could remember their name the second time they came in, even better. Fantasy or not, the renewed faith in themselves as men that they took home was priceless to them. My shift at the Century began at 7 p.m. and ended at 4 o'clock in the morning. At the end of my shift, I'd head to the Taco Bell down the street for a quesadilla or to Jerry's Deli for soup with one of the other girls. I'd pull up to my Burbank apartment as the sun was rising and do a line or two of cocaine, watching the world wake up from my window as I counted and faced my piles of money. I'd sleep most of the day away, wake up to another line of coke, and then head to the mall to spend other people's husbands' and fathers' money on whatever I decided at the moment. Designer jeans, makeup, shoes, a set of DVDs that would teach me Spanish that I would never open. One day I bought a parrot just because I had $900 in my pocket. I gave it away the next week to a bird sanctuary because it bored me. Everything had started to bore me. How was it the men seemed so full after they left, and though they filled my pockets, they left me feeling so empty. I was losing track of the days, losing focus. Drink some water. I'm using yours. So the next thing that I want to talk about, well, before I start, so I was talking to my mother a couple months ago, and she said to me on the phone that she was so proud of the fact that I had never done any drugs and I was a good kid, and it was shocked me, and I knew that my book was coming out, and I knew she was going to be the first one to buy it, because whose mother isn't the first one to buy their shit, you know? And I got really nervous about releasing this book, and I thought, you know, that's what addicts do. They hide everything from everybody, and my mom had no idea that my father was an addict as well, but my mother had no idea that I ever did any drugs, ever danced, basically ever did anything besides be her little angel. So, you know, people have asked me why I call this an semi-autobiographical novel rather than a memoir, and I guess it's just a little bit to protect people in my life, like my mother, who's the sweetest person in the world and who doesn't need to know that everything in this book is real, but it's all real. I also think calling it a memoir when you're in a band is almost harmful to what you've created, because as proud as I am of my band, this is something completely different. This is not about me being in a band, and I wanted people to see that and not pick up this book thinking that it was about my band. So anyways, here's the next piece. I got out of bed, went back to my hiding spot, and fished out my last dime bag of cocaine. I laid out 4 lines on my nightstand, about half a baggie. I stared at it, then looked back at the mirror at myself. A purple bruise began to bulge around my eye. I fucking deserve this, I thought to myself. I deserve every single scar he put on me. I was a junky piece of shit. I wanted out of this life. I didn't have anything or anyone. I'd fucked up everything good in my life, and it was my own goddamn fault. I thought about how the barrel of a gun might taste in my mouth, metallic and cold like cheap fucking silverware. I laughed that my final thought before blowing my head off would be about Sizzler silverware. Then I made a split-second decision. I snorted back the 4 lines I had laid out, then took the rest of the baggie of drugs and flushed it down the toilet. I was fucking done with that part of my life. Things were going to be different. I started to reassemble the drawers that Daryl had ransacked. I organized my closet and cleaned the bathroom and vacuums. By the time I was done, it was near 1 a.m. and my buzz had dwindled. I started to regret throwing my drugs away. I checked the toilet just in case the baggie had floated back up. You know, such luck. You guys know you've done that before.
Yeah.
I lit a candle, got in bed, and tried to sleep again. I lay awake for an hour before getting out of bed and digging around by my nightstand for any leftover crumbs of cocaine that Daryl had missed. I found 2 small nuggets covered in dog fur and carpet debris and chopped them up in a little line and snorted back. A wave of relief fell over me, but I knew the high would only last a few minutes. I was restless. Well, maybe I could just do 1 more 20 bag that night and then never again. That would absolutely be it. I called my dealer up. Hello? Johnny's New York accent cut through the phone line. Hey, it's Autumn. I just wondered if you're up and if I could come by. Only for you. Call me when you're out front and make it fast. I knew I shouldn't have made the call. Now I have to go, and Johnny would try to put his dick in me like he always did. Bianca lay next to me in bed. She put her paw on my chest, her way of telling me to go back to sleep. I pushed her off, threw on my sweatpants, and got in my truck. It was a 5-minute drive to his house. I put on Velvet Revolver and sped down Burbank Boulevard. I sang along with Scott Weiland, looking into my rearview mirror at my purple eye. It wasn't so bad. It would be okay. I would be okay. When I looked back at the road, there was a minivan stopped dead in front of me. There was nowhere to go, no time to slow down. The violent crunch of metal meeting metal at 60 miles an hour filled my ears. My truck's front end crumpled, thrusting the minivan down the street. The windshield imploded, showering me with glass as my face pressed into the airbag. Now this was something. This felt real. Fuck everything else. Fuck everyone. Fuck my father, fuck Danny Hunt, fuck Daryl, and fuck all the latte-drinking whores that called themselves my friends while we shoveled drugs up our noses. Fuck every piece of shit that thought that the crumpled $20 bill in their hand let them own me. Fuck Hollywood, the big machine that brought me here just to grind me up and spit me out. There was blood, shards of glass, and white powder floated all around me. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And then there was nothing. Silence. Now I could sleep. It had been so long since I slept. So that was a turning point in my life. I had a horrible, horrible car accident, and then I decided to go back to school. And as some of you might know, I went to mortuary college, and it literally saved my life going there. Before I started dancing and moved to LA, I was a straight A student, probably bored out of my mind. I got such good grades I didn't have to barely go to school to get good grades. And I always knew that one day I wanted to go back to school, and that was absolutely the right time. My mortuary program was all anatomy, physiology, chemistry, embalming classes, and there was no way I could get fucked up and still manage to go to school the next day and get good grades. So it really did save my life going back to school. And then when I started working at the mortuary and helping families and embalming people, that helped even more. And I hope you guys get the book so you can read all about that. I do want to read something funny from one of my very first days as a real mortician. Wait until you see the Hispanic panic, Melissa said, raising a pencil to an eyebrow. It'll get you every time. Sean crossed his arms and puffed out his bird chest. You have to be tough. I mean, really, really tough. Just close the casket and walk away. I liked my new coworkers immediately. A goth girl with lanky hair and glasses and an aspiring fire boy were to show me the ropes my first night at Holy Cross Mortuary and Cemetery. That evening, we had 2 viewings, a Filipino family and a stone-faced Caucasian family. The lounge area overflowed with the pungent smells of a Filipino feast of mourning. The white women making their way to viewing room number 4 covered their tiny plastic noses in horror. The viewings at Holy Cross fascinated me as much as my grandfathers had many years before. The chemical-filled dead looked sharp in their fancy suits and dresses that they hadn't had a use for while they were alive. Their faces were painted so heavily that their own grandchildren couldn't recognize them. Their families moaned and wailed and then nodded in agreement that yes, the embalmer had done a great job. And the Catholics, they could do it for days before they could bring themselves to actually put the damn corpse in the ground. For a bunch of people that believe so fully in a magical sky world where life would be better tenfold, they sure had a hard time letting go. This death thing had become as broken as marriage had. There was a time when it was welcome at home. The sick were comforted and surrounded by their families as they passed. They died in the same bed that they had made their children in. Somewhere along the way, death had become a crippling fear, the end of the American dream. The healthcare industry had made it into an ugly thing that hooked Grandma and Grandpa up to a machine, and who wanted to look at that? It was better to let them go and not think about it too much. Better to sweep it under the rug, shut it away behind a nursing room door. I'd been at the mortuary for a week when my manager gave me a set of heavy gold keys and left me alone to handle a charity viewing for an old Mexican. His church had paid for his services and burial, kindly placing him in the cheapest casket they could purchase, a compressed cardboard number that was almost passable from 10 feet away. He was brown and wrinkled in his baby blue box, surrounded by his family. Close the casket exactly at 8 p.m., my boss said as we watched the family from the doorway of the chapel. Even if people are still gathered around it, if you don't, they'll never leave. My blood ran cold. Maybe I wasn't ready. I turned to object to my solitude that evening, but my boss was already gone. At 7:55 p.m., I gingerly made my way towards the casket. It was still surrounded by throngs of sobbing family members. I forced my way to the front of the blue cardboard box, elbowing people like I was at a sold-out rock concert. Positioning myself in front of it, I cleared my throat. "Thank you for coming to the Rodriguez viewing tonight," I said assertively as I could muster. "We will be closing the door in 5 minutes, so please pay your final respects and exit the building. Services will be held at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. No one moved. No one pretended they were going to move. Brown arms shot past me and into the casket. The viewing is over for the evening, I repeated, and changed my stance to that of a raging mother lion. The sobs grew louder. Women clutched at the dead man in the casket. So this is what my coworkers had warned me of. I had a full-blown case of the Hispanic panic on my hands. I would have to be relentless. I dodged the arms and reached for the top of the casket to pull it down, but it stuck. I pulled harder. Nothing. I gave one last strong pull, and the lid of the casket groaned as its hinges weakened, released, and snapped. My cheeks burned. Poor old Mexican. He had worked hard his whole life just to have a girl in a suit that cost more than his entire funeral break his casket. I scrambled to pick the lid up off the floor and propped it on like ill-fitting Tupperware before regaining my authoritative role in front of it. To my surprise, the crowd began to retreat. They trickled out the door solemnly until it was just me, the dead Mexican, and my carpet sweeper. I kicked off my pumps, collected the snotty tissues and Dorito bags left under the seats in the chapel, and vacuumed the carpet. After I was done, I moved Mr. Rodriguez to the back room where he would wait to be wheeled out for his 9 a.m. service the following morning. I lifted the top of the casket, looked down at him, and stroked his forehead and hands. The dead were so peaceful. I'm so sorry about your casket, I said. I'm new. I'm still learning. And don't worry, your family will be back in the morning. I replaced the lid properly, hoping my boss wouldn't notice my mishap the next morning. There was only one other body in the back room that evening. I opened a tiny casket and peered in on an over-involved infant with a glob of pink lipstick on her rosebud mouth. There was no one else around. What could it hurt? I lifted her body out and cradled her in my arms. I didn't want the bodies to feel lonely after their families had left them alone for the evening under my care. Loneliness was the one thing I definitely understood. I have one more thing to read, and then I'll let you guys get out of here. We're actually going to be doing a signing after this, and you guys have any questions as well. Me and Marisa can answer all those for you, too. So this last thing I'm going to read was probably the hardest thing for me to write out of the whole book, and I waited till the last moment, and it took a lot to get it out. And I'll probably cry, because I cry with everything. Heidi knows, whenever we do interviews, I start bawling like an idiot, so excuse me in advance. I pushed my way through the crowd into the dressing room that night, secured a prime spot for my dance bag, and started undressing. All around me, girls clamored to get ready for the night shift. They glued on fake eyelashes and teased their hair with rat combs, hid their stretch marks with Sally Hansen leg spray, and doused themselves with drugstore perfumes. Strippers alone had made cotton candy body spray $1 million industry. The girl next to me arched her back towards the mirror. "Girl, I want a stupid booty," she said, holding her dimpled ass in her hands. "This lady in El Monte will give you a stupid booty for like 2 G's. I smiled at her, stepping into my acrylics. Why couldn't they make regular shoes as comfy as acrylic stripper shoes? No Christian Louboutins on the planet could feel as easy as these shoes, wrapped around my tattooed feet with strips of industrial plastic. It was a busy night. As soon as I walked out onto the floor, a customer grabbed my arm and led me to the back of the lap dance area. I sat on him and started to grind. "Can you do it harder? I like it harder." His cock bulged under his thin linen pants. "And stick your ass out more like this," he said, shoving my lower back down with the palm of his hand. When I was tired of squatting, I turned around and rubbed my thigh against his cock as I looked at myself in the mirror behind the lap dance booth. I was remarkably well preserved. I didn't look much different than I did at 21. I still weighed exactly 119 pounds, my ass was still firm, my tits, God bless Dr. Linder, were aesthetically pleasing high beam 34Cs. I had always had pesky hereditary dark circles under my eyes that I slathered with $100 eye creams and concealer, but not a crow's foot in sight. I had grown to live with the dog bite scar on my cheek, the laugh lines I'd had since I was a kid, and the stretch marks that had been with me since puberty made my hips, ass, and thighs swell into their current stripperific proportions. I had given up the late-night Taco Bell runs and cocaine and spent a healthy hour and a half in the gym every day. Most customers guessed my age to be around 24. I'd been telling the same schmucks 26 for years. Only a select persistent few knew the truth. Point being, I potentially had many good years of healing left in me. But I had many years behind me, and my goal was never to become a lifer. The aging Asian flower with 10 boob jobs under her belt, the 50-year-old Pamela Anderson wannabe with cheek implants stored in her leathery face, stringy makeshift extensions hiding the scar of the wreckage of her own existence. I'd spent enough time in this life raft. I turned away from his gaze, sitting back down on his cock. "Seriously, you could do it harder, that's what I like. And put your legs like this," my customer said, putting his hands on my thighs. His fat fingers left red welts in my skin. Enough time in the life raft. I bent back his fingers and stood up. I turned around and looked at him. He squirmed in his seat, his cock still throbbing under his pants. "You're a filthy piece of shit," I said to him. "Well, hey, at least I don't show my tits for $1, he said, licking his lips. And he had a fucking point there. I looked him in the eye. I thought about all the things that I could do to him. I could slap him or slam his head into the mirrored wall behind him. I could take the beer bottle that sat on the table next to me and bash it against his skull. I could gouge his eyeballs out with the same broken end of the side beer bottle. He just simply wasn't worth it. None of it was worth it anymore. I walked away without asking for my pay. Bitch, he called after me. I walked back into the dressing room. Cathartically, I took off my bikini and put it back into my dance bag. I put my acrylic pumps away. I redressed in my street clothes and threw my bag over my shoulder. Leaving already? You were just barely out there. Girl, go get you some money. Annette, the house mom, called after me as I walked out the door. I walked back to the crowd, pausing in the middle of the room to look at my reflection one last time in the long mirrored wall in front of me. And that's the moment I killed her. I knew that it had to be done, and I knew I had to be the one to do it. The taste of metal made her gag a little, and I almost chickened out. I closed my eyes, pulled the trigger, and blew her brains against the wall. The blood spattered on the customers and stained their shirts. They didn't even notice. They kept drinking their beers, even after she had bled all over them. I watched her struggle for a moment with the situation. She put her hand to the hole in her head, and tears welled up in her eyes. She looked back at me accusingly. I saw her at 5 with her showgirl doll, at 18 with her long brown bob, in her 20s with her blonde curls. She reached for me once as I turned to walk out the door. Sorry, I told you I'm a friggin' baby. But she didn't cry out. She didn't try to stop me. She knew it was over. There'd be no retirement party, no fanfare, no long goodbyes, no ticker tape parade. There'd be a small funeral, her parents, her lover, past lovers. There would be white roses, and she'd be buried in her motorcycle boots with the ashes of her dead dog. Someone once said that death is the stripping away of all that is not you. The secret of life is to die before you die and find that there is no death. And that's it. Thank you all for being here. Marisa, do you want to come up and do questions? Does anyone have any questions? If not, we can start signing books for you guys in the back.
So what is that, where girls compete with each other, but women stand up and support? Is that the quote?
Yeah, I mean, especially out here, I just feel that it's hard to meet genuine female friends out here. There's it's such a, yeah, I wish I knew who said that. It was like on one of those little kind of like photo Instagram. Yeah, and you know, and I did mean that, you know, also directed towards Carla, because, you know, she really went out of her way to make this happen and invited me to be a part of this. You know, and a lot of times, you know, people, especially women, just can be really catty. You can't have more than someone else, you know, and no one can be genuinely happy for you. And that's something that, I guess I just don't understand that kind of mentality. It's just so mean girl, you know, like you should just, if someone has something, they accomplish something, then be proud of them, support them. Like why would, I just don't understand what it's just.
It's an attitude of successful people, but it's really well stated. And I just want to make sure women everywhere, women's lives often are so unhappy, and you know, when we get any wisdom or any glimmer anything from our experience and share it, and that's like so smart. I think everybody should have that quote like in their fingertips. And I was just having that conversation with someone. I said, well, you know, he was very surprised, but I said, I'm pro-sex worker. I think they should have unions. And I'm just wondering from your experience if there's anything supportive for women you might suggest. I don't really know, you know, I was kind of winging it in the conversation. But
I think that being there for each other, which is kind of, you know, what Melissa's quote is all about. You know, we tear each other to pieces all the time. I don't think I really had good women friends until I was 30 years old, and I'm very lucky right now. I have very strong women in my life, like my Heidi's over here hiding in the corner. She's obviously the other lead singer in my band, and so I have her, and I have Marisa, and this beautiful girl in the front row right here too, Amy. You know, surround yourself with people who are also doing things, because then they're not going to be jealous of you and kind of destroy your life. You know, I think in my past, I surrounded myself with women who weren't concerned with doing anything for themselves. They were concerned about having a boyfriend or whatever else. And I think that once you have your own stuff, you can support other women and surround yourself with healthy women.
you're very lucky to attract that. That's great.
Yeah, it's definitely been a gift the last few years. Anybody else? Good. All right, awesome. So we are going to go, after we sign some books back there, we're all going to go to the Rainbow and drink, so come join us.
Have a cocktail with us.
Thank you guys so much for being here. This is my first book.
Thank you guys for coming out. Again, the book is for purchase at the register, and you can join us in the back where they'll sign.